I think it all started in 10th grade when one of my neighbor friends, his name was Mitch, would bring these trophies to school. He'd get on the bus and he'd have a trophy in his hand. And I'd say, "What's that for?" And he said, "Well, we went to a debate tournament. We finished third." And I thought, dang, I can do that. And so I joined the debate team, and I did that in high school and in college. And debate became a formative experience for me, as it is for a lot of people, either people who teach argumentation or people who major in communication studies. And so I was a high school debate coach for a couple of years. I worked at a summer high school debate institute for 6 years. And then after I finished graduate school with a degree in speech communication, my master's and PhD are from the U of M, University of Minnesota, and my BA is from Macalester College. And during that time, I was very much connected with rhetoric and debate and advocacy and argumentation. And so I started teaching at Augsburg University in Minneapolis in the fall of 1986. And I've been here ever since, but I've also taught argumentation at the University of Minnesota, at Hamline University in St. Paul, and taught adjunct at a variety of schools in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So it all began though in 10th grade when I saw my friend Mitch bringing a debate trophy onto the school bus and wondering what that was all about. I mean, I started teaching argumentation courses when I was in grad school, probably in about 1982 or 1983. And then I taught at Augsburg and Hamline quite a bit, the argumentation course. And over that period of time, I probably used 6 different textbooks. And I was never really totally satisfied with any of them. I could see some pluses, I could see some minuses. But among the motivations was, first of all, I just saw gaps in each of these books. There was stuff that is very relevant to argumentation and just wasn't covered. So I'd have to devote all this time and energy to trying to fill in those gaps. Second, I just thought that when they did talk about certain issues or concepts, their analysis or their explanation was not always spot on. It was either a little bit unclear or a little bit off base for me. And I thought, I have to keep correcting the author and saying, here's what I think a better definition or a better example would be of that particular concept. And then finally, I just thought the writing style for argumentation textbooks was pretty dry. And that's maybe a charitable adjective to use. Sometimes it was just downright turgid. But argumentation texts over the years have been pretty gray. And I thought there was a place for a textbook that actually was written in a user-friendly manner, without a lot of pontificating, without a lot of academic jargon, and that it really could be useful to people who would read it and understand it much more easily than the books that were out there. So I say those are the 3 main things. Well, we're in a very different place with respect to argumentation. And the older argumentation texts, frankly, are a little bit out of touch in that respect. And so I've tried to be mindful of what's been going on in the world. Visual evidence, for example, has become much more dominant. Narratives have become a type of evidence, if you will, where people are really outlining a vision of how they view reality that isn't normally captured with the traditional argumentation framework. And the use of narratives as evidence, as support for things, has become very common. And then I've also built in to the text at points things that have happened, such as how social media have impacted argumentation and communication generally, and how it's a very different terrain than it used to be. And so I've tried to be mindful of trends in our culture that need to be reflected in an argumentation text as well. The book has some unique features that you don't find in other argumentation textbooks. It has many of the standard things you would expect, things involving evidence, reasoning, claims, fallacies in reasoning, those kinds of things. But it also has special features that are not found in most textbooks. First of all, I tried to incorporate some of the critical thinking literature into a discussion of argumentation. And I'm not sure why that hasn't happened before, but almost all of my students, unless they're education majors, have never even heard of Bloom's taxonomy, which most of us in education know all too well. But a lot of normal students, regular students don't know about that, and I incorporate that into the first chapter. Also deal with the ethics of argumentation, both from the sending and the receiving perspective. And often argumentation texts don't talk much about ethics. And then the chapter on narratives, which I already mentioned, that we should look more at the storylines that are part of people's arguments. And then there's an entire chapter of the book devoted to spheres of argument, which again is a little bit unusual for an argumentation textbook, to not just take a generic approach, but to say, how are arguments different in the political arena? How are they different in academia? How are they different in the business setting or in a legal setting? And how arguments must change and adapt to those particular contexts, and why it makes a difference how you address an issue depending on what sphere of society you are in at that moment. So that's another unique element of the book that I think is really very important, because argument is always a function in part of the context in which you're making that argument. I do like the visuals, because most argumentation textbooks don't have any visual elements. Maybe they'll have a second color somewhere, but the Kendall Hunt version is full color with images and graphics and stuff like that. And so I like that. And I also like the fact that in the 5th edition, to try to provide a little bit more gravitas, frankly, and connect with the academic literature, I've highlighted one journal article, typically in each chapter, that relates to the topic in that chapter, to try to make a connection between academic scholarship and the ideas that are in that chapter. And I think I've been able to make that connection pretty clear, when again, sometimes it can seem very ponderous to read journal articles. I've tried to boil them down to their essence and explain them in ways that are meaningful to people. And so I like that feature of it. And I like the general organization of the book. I think it makes a lot of sense. I broke out a separate chapter just on statistical evidence, because in the chapter on evidence, there was just so much to say about statistics. I couldn't put it all in that one place. And so I think I made some good decisions about how it's organized. Well, I think it's been good. I try not to, pander to them too much or go out of my way to ask them. I try to listen to things that they do say. Sometimes my own students will tell me, when I read the book, in my mind, I am hearing you talking. And usually I'll respond by saying, well, that's kind of what I was going for. The language in the book is very oral. And that's a very intentional choice that I made, that I wanted to communicate with the reader in a way that felt a little bit more personal and a little bit more natural. And I think that's probably the biggest single type of feedback I've gotten, is I can read this and I can understand this. And I really appreciate that, because I worked very hard to make sure that I didn't have a lot of gobbledygook in there, that everything was said in a way that an intelligent layperson could understand. And indeed, my book is being used at another school, Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, in a first-year seminar for science majors. And the idea there was that science majors can't communicate very well, which is a stereotype that we have, and they don't know how to advocate for much of anything. And the person who has adopted that book in the physics department down at Gustavus has told me that he gets it automatically, immediately, and so do his students. So I think it's a very accessible book, and I think that's been the dominant strength of it. I know everybody wants ancillary materials, or at least some ancillary materials. I personally like to have a test bank when I adopt a book. I have found that many publishers' test banks really kind of suck. The questions are either too obvious or unclear or just not very useful. I've tried very hard to make the test bank user-friendly and kind of move-in ready, if we were using a realty analogy. These are questions you can use, and they're good questions that can form a test bank. I've also developed PowerPoints for each of the 12 chapters of the book, so those are available as well. And then finally, with the 5th edition, I have at least cobbled together a very brief manual, an instruction manual. It's not nearly as detailed and exhaustive as many of them are. I wasn't convinced at the time that it needed to be. I do try to point out some of the types of activities that you can offer in a course like this, some of the things to encourage and things to avoid in a teaching and argumentation course. Perhaps it's a manual that could use a revision at some point, but I think it's for the person who's never taught argumentation, it's at least an introduction to some of the things you need to be thinking about whenever you teach this particular subject. I had tried to get my book published by sending query letters and prospectuses, prospecti, whatever it is, to publishers. And I just had trouble getting anybody's attention. I don't know. It was during, 07, 08, 09, when the economy was kind of problematic. And I just wasn't getting much interest. And so I self-published the first 3 editions of the book through one of those vanity publishers. And I'm glad that I did. At least I got it out there. But a friend of mine who is way better known in the NCA, National Communication Association, than I am, told me you should really talk to Kendall Hunt. You should really talk to Paul Carty. And so when the NCA convention was in Las Vegas, I handed him the 3rd self-published edition of the book. And I said, tell me what you think. Would Kendall Hunt be interested in this? And he said, I'll get back to you. And about 10 days later, he did and said, well, I think we want to publish this. And so I was very gratified that someone had finally taken an interest. It's hard to get people's attention. I don't care if you're an artist with a new album or an author with a new novel, that to get people's attention is very difficult. And he was attentive enough, nice enough, supportive enough to say, we can do this. And so the 4th edition then came out through Kendall Hunt. And because the 4th edition was reasonably successful, they said, how about doing a 5th edition with the full color, the images, and we'll ramp up the production value of the book a little bit. And so I've always been very grateful for the support that Kendall Hunt has shown, and grateful to Angie Willenbring and Paul Carty, and specifically because they've been such supportive and helpful people in this process. In general, specifically, one of the things that can happen is that someone might give you feedback about a particular aspect of the book. I remember a student came up to me very politely, somewhat being very reticent, like I don't want to upset him or offend him. But she said, Professor Lapakko, I have to tell you that there's a misspelling in the book. And I said, oh my, what is it? And so she said, well, you've got the word capital spelled CAPITAL, but it's really TOL. And so then I had to very politely respond and say, well, actually, the OL of that capital means the Capitol building. But what I was referring to is the capital city. And if it is a capital city, then it's CAPITAL. So it's not really incorrect. I didn't know how to say that politely, but she thought she was doing me a favor by catching one of these typos in the book. I think at a more general level, one of the weird dynamics is, and I didn't have this experience until I'd written the book, but when you adopt another book, there's this sense that whoever wrote it must be like this world-renowned authority on the subject, somebody named Wolfgang, who probably studied at Oxford, wears 3-piece suits, and spends all his spare time reading Heidegger and Aristotle or something like that. And to realize that their own instructor, a real human being, has written this book can both sort of work for you and work against you a little bit, because they're expecting that it's going to be somebody named Wolfgang. It's not going to be just an ordinary person writing this book. And so they sometimes don't quite know what to make of that. And so it's kind of funny when people are trying to figure out what to do with the book in that regard. Other times, of course, they're very kind of taken with the fact that their instructor has written the book and they think it's really kind of cool. But it's not universally that way, because students have been trained to think that if the instructor says something, it's sort of his opinion. But if it's in the textbook, it must be true. And so it's a very weird dynamic I'm still trying to process, but it's the relationship of me to the book, to the students, and what they make of that connection. And I'm still trying to figure that one out. But that's the one thing I ponder about quite a bit.